He was sent to kill her. She was ready to die. But one broken leg changed everything.
Smoke and fire of humanity. Through the thick shroud of dust and smoke, Kepler, 442b emerged like a requiem of ruin, a planet where battlefields had fallen silent, yet still echoed with the relentless drums of war. The brutal conflict between humanity and the Xelari had scarred this world beyond recognition, turning it into a wasteland riddled with open wounds, testaments to the clash of two civilizations. Captain Shane Gray, of the Earth's Doomsday Fleet, staggered through the scorched remains and shattered ground. Each step felt like a challenge thrown at life itself. His blood had already mingled with the soil and ash, yet it couldn't wash away the memories of war, of comrades who fell for nothing but futility. He no longer knew why he was alive. Was it to keep fighting, or simply to survive, even when there was nothing left but emptiness? Death in war did not offer release. Sometimes it refused even that. As he wandered into a desolate forest zone, the smoke thickened until it seemed to press down on his chest like a hand gripping his heart. Suddenly, a faint sound, barely audible, like a wounded breath, broke the stillness to his right. In a world aflame and buried in dust, it was almost impossible to notice, but it was enough to pull Shane from the abyss of his thoughts. He turned, following the sound, and saw a shape. A Xelari collapsed among the ruins. She lay there, her silver hair catching the flickering light of distant explosions, like a dying star fading in the void. Her eyes were closed, clenched shut with pain, but even so, a fierce pride radiated from her, unyielding in the face of death. Her body had been nearly destroyed. Her legs were mangled beyond healing. Shards of bone, strips of flesh, fragments of a warrior's former strength. The wound was fatal. There was no saving her. And yet her eyes were different. They weren't the eyes of someone surrendering. They were the eyes of a warrior, unyielding, defiant, even as her body betrayed her. Not all deaths come easily. Shane stood frozen, unsure what to do. His hand gripped his rifle tight, but it trembled. Something deep within him cracked. He was a soldier, and she was the enemy, but he couldn't pull the trigger. "Why don't you just kill me?" Her voice was like a breeze through ash, soft but edged with challenge. She opened her eyes, meeting his without fear, only a hard, unwavering question. Shane didn't answer right away. He stared into those eyes that had nothing left but defiance. No hatred, no fear, just the terrible silence of understanding. He began, his voice hoarse, like it had been locked away for too long. But he couldn't stop himself. These words had to be said like an exorcism. "I can't kill you." Arya watched him for a long moment. She saw it, not weakness, but a choice. And it confused her. Why the hesitation? "You are a warrior of Earth. We are enemies. You should kill me," she said, her voice quieter now, tinged with disbelief. Shane looked at her again. His eyes no longer carried the edge of a soldier, but the weary glow of someone carrying too much loneliness. "If I kill you," he whispered, "I won't be myself anymore." Everything inside him came undone in that single moment. The battles, the bloodshed, none of it meant anything if it turned him into the thing he hated most, a man who had lost his soul. Arya paused, a shallow breath catching in her throat. Her cracked lips curled into a smile, not mocking, but knowing. "Then I guess we'll die together." Shane said nothing. Slowly, silently, he knelt and lifted her into his arms. Beneath the flickering light of distant explosions, the silhouettes of two enemies, one human, one Xelari, stood together on a dying world, surrounded by the rubble of two shattered civilizations. The war no longer mattered. All that remained was them. An unexpected kindness. The choking smoke refused to lift, veiling the ravaged forest where Shane and Arya had found a fleeting, fragile peace. But there was no place on this planet untouched by danger, no corner safe enough to forget the pain of war. As Shane trudged forward with Arya slung across his back, the ache in her body served as a relentless reminder of helplessness and of all that had been lost. When they stumbled upon a cave wide enough to shelter them, Shane laid Arya down with a gentleness that betrayed his exhaustion. Both were weary to the bone, though neither would dare admit it. Shane hurriedly rummaged through his backpack, pulling out medical tools with care etched into every movement. "You don't have to agree," he said, voice hoarse but firm. "But if you want to live, I need to help you." His blunt words couldn't mask the tension threading through his chest. Arya looked at him for a moment, then scoffed, eyes steeled with the kind of defiance only warriors knew. She had no strength left to fight, but the pride of her kind, the pride of a Xelari warrior, remained unshaken. "I don't need help from an enemy," she replied coldly, each word slicing through the air like a blade. Shane didn't respond right away. Instead, he calmly took out a small syringe filled with anesthetic. Her wound was swollen, showing signs of infection. Whether she wanted it or not, he had to act. "You can refuse, but without me you'll die." Arya squinted, barely managing to raise her head. Her lips were pressed tight, fingers clutching a nearby rock as if she could crush it from sheer will. But her weakening body betrayed her. She could feel the chill of death creeping closer. And so, reluctantly, grudgingly, she shut her eyes. The gesture wasn't surrender, but it was the closest thing to trust she'd offered since their encounter. Shane moved in, his hands strong yet careful as he tended to the wound. Every motion was measured, as though trying to preserve the last shred of dignity she still clung to. He kept his eyes fixed on her injury, but deep down, another kind of pain stirred within him, a pain rooted in understanding. He wasn't just a soldier. He had once been a man, and in this moment, he saw a kindred soul, another warrior caught in the crossfire of a war neither of them chose. Arya said nothing, but her heart tightened. Each sting of the medical tools sent sharp jolts through her. But beneath the pain was something else, something softer. Not agony, but care. When he finished cleaning and dressing the wound, Shane withdrew the syringe. "That's all I can do." Arya didn't respond, only let out a quiet sigh. She could feel a shift inside her, something she couldn't yet name. She was a warrior, yet now she felt like a creature trapped. She couldn't move forward, couldn't fight, and for the first time, nothing made sense. Shane reached into his pack and retrieved a small box, rations and water. He held it out to her. Arya glanced at it, then back at him, eyes filled with suspicion. "You think I'll eat that?" she asked with a sneer. Shane didn't reply. He simply set the box beside her and turned away. He hadn't expected gratitude, but deep inside, something heavier was stirring, something he couldn't explain. Days passed, and Arya began to notice. The care he gave her wasn't part of some cruel enemy ploy to keep her alive for interrogation or execution. The meals, the water, the silent company, these things grew into rhythms, into something oddly comforting within the cold, echoing cave. A week later, her condition showed minor improvement, but her legs, the same legs that once carried her across battlefields, were gone. The loss now throbbed not just in her body, but in her spirit. Sadness crept in, shame, a vulnerability she had never allowed herself to feel. She had once fought with unmatched ferocity, had never tasted defeat, and now she was no more than a broken piece, something irreparable. Shane understood that. Though he didn't voice hollow words of comfort, he recognized the weight of her silence. Empathy needed no language. Her pain echoed in him. "How does it feel?" Shane finally asked one evening. To see everything you once were vanish? His tone wasn't cruel. It was an offering, a chance to share the burden. Arya didn't answer at first. Her gaze drifted into the distance, searching the void for something that might restore what was lost. "That's the pain war leaves behind," she said at last, her voice stripped of arrogance. "I can't accept that I'm this weak." Shane sat beside her, his eyes warm with something human. "No one said you're weak," he murmured. "We all face things we can't control." In that silence, they were no longer enemies. They were survivors, two souls who had seen too much, endured too long, and now faced a new kind of battle, not for victory, but for connection. A fragile planet. Kepler, 442b, a small planet adrift in the far reaches of space, thousands of light years from Earth, shimmered like a rare gem in the boundless void. Though only a third the size of Earth, Kepler, 442b harbored an ecosystem so pristine, so perfectly balanced, it seemed nature herself had carved it with care. Verdant forests draped the land in a seamless green veil. Serene rivers coiled around snow-capped mountains, and the air, clean, crisp, untainted, whispered of a world untouched by greed. Its stable climate and fertile soil made it not just inhabitable, but a dream, a haven. But paradise never comes without a price. This fragile planet had become the battleground in a brutal tug-of-war between two dying civilizations, Earth and Tabby. Earth, exhausted by centuries of exploitation, stood on the brink of collapse. Its natural resources were dwindling to a whisper, and the promise of a future grew dim. The human race, staring down the barrel of extinction, knew that if new worlds weren't found, and quickly, what remained of their species would vanish into history. Tabby, homeworld of the Xelari, suffered a different demise. Their planet was succumbing to a biological rot. Their once proud people, born with heightened senses and psychic prowess, were weakening. Their resources depleted, their gene lines thinning. And like humanity, they too had turned desperate eyes toward the stars. To Kepler, 442b, their only shot at rebirth. The struggle for this planet had become more than territorial. It was existential, a final, desperate sprint for survival. War wasn't just inevitable, it had already begun. Shane and Arya, caught in the storm. Unwitting pawns in a galactic chess match, Shane and Arya had no idea how deep the currents ran. They had not chosen this planet, nor this war. But like leaves in a rising tide, they were being swept into a tempest neither could control. As Shane nursed Arya back to health, offering her clean water, carefully gathered food, and stitched bandages, his thoughts drifted far beyond their camp. Though the world around them pulsed with tranquil beauty, he felt the undercurrent of something far more ominous. Kepler, 442b, was a powder keg, and the fuse had already been lit. Both Earth and Tabby were mobilizing. Fleets launched from Earth in a flurry of desperation, carrying soldiers and scientists by the thousands. From Tabby, the Xelari unleashed their finest warriors, genetically refined, psychically linked, bred for war. The clash would not be delayed much longer. But even as Shane prepared for that reality, his attention returned, always, to Arya. Her pain wasn't just physical. He saw it in the silence behind her eyes, a fracture deeper than any wound. Arya, the Xelari warrior, proud and unyielding, was now dependent on a human, her enemy. That truth cut at her dignity. "You won't survive without me," Shane said gently, his voice firm but not unkind, as he tied a fresh dressing around her injured side. Arya didn't answer. Her eyes burned with pride and helplessness. She was not made for dependence. She was born for war, for strength, not fragility. But even the strongest must face the truth. Power alone was no longer enough. As Shane turned away, she closed her eyes, burying the shame that throbbed beneath her ribcage. Survival now meant more than just the will to fight. It meant the humility to live through another's mercy. Kepler 442b, a piece on the cosmic chessboard. Above them, solar storms raged in the Kepler system, distorting the atmosphere, casting strange auroras in the skies. And with every cosmic pulse, the two great powers inched closer. On one side, Earth's fleets surged forward, soldiers hardened by years of training and fueled by the fear of extinction. On the other, Tabby's finest warriors soared through space, their psychic minds attuned, their mission singular: conquer or perish. Everyone knew only one civilization could claim Kepler 442b. There would be no shared stewardship, no treaty, no mercy. The planet could sustain life, but not two warring species. You and I, we may not be able to change this war, Shane said, voice low but resolute as he watched the stars. But I believe we can survive it. The both of us. There was something fragile in his tone. Hope, perhaps, or desperation pretending to be courage. Arya turned to him, then looked skyward, where ships already painted the heavens like falling stars. If we survive, we have to find a way to change it. This war, this madness. But I don't know if there's room left in this universe for people like us. Shane placed a hand gently on her shoulder. His fingers didn't grip, they offered presence, not command. He knew the rules had changed. This wasn't just about survival anymore. Kepler 442b would test them, not just as soldier and warrior, but as something more. It would test them as humans, and something beyond. But first, they had to weather the storm. Never left behind. Shane and Arya sat in silence inside the cave, the flickering light from the artificial torch casting trembling shadows across the cold, jagged walls. The air inside was dense, as if every sound was swallowed by the absolute stillness of Kepler 442b. Arya stared into the fire, not for its warmth, but for something else entirely. Her mind, a labyrinth of thoughts, refused to rest. Her wounds, though carefully tended by Shane, had yet to heal completely. Her legs, the most formidable weapons of a Xelari warrior, were now nothing but searing reminders of pain and loss. The sense of what she had lost haunted her every time she glanced down. Shane turned to Arya. Patience gleamed in his eyes, but so did worry. She was changing. He could feel it. The hardened shell, the pride that once guarded every word, was slowly being replaced by long nights of silent contemplation. Arya no longer kept her defenses up around him, yet a distance remained, an invisible scar, a wall neither could yet cross. "How are you feeling?" Shane's voice was low, gentle, as though he were afraid to disturb her thoughts. Arya didn't answer right away. She remained silent for a long moment, eyes fixed on the flames. "Better," she finally said, "but I'll never forget what I've lost." She turned her head, her gaze drifting to Shane, not with hatred, but exhaustion. "Do you understand?" He met her eyes and didn't respond immediately. He knew the feeling of losing a part of oneself was not something easily mended. But perhaps, for a warrior like Arya, accepting help from an enemy was a fate worse than death. "I understand," Shane said, his voice soft and strange, as if he was afraid of hurting her again. "But you're not alone anymore." Arya turned away, resting her back against the rock wall, as though unwilling to face him, even though his words had stirred something inside her. "Not everyone wants to help others," she muttered, though deep down, she felt a warmth she couldn't explain. A warmth that embarrassed her. No matter what, he had helped her. He was still the enemy, but he had stayed. Looking into Arya's eyes, Shane could see the pain etched deep within them. He couldn't do much more than care for her, but perhaps, in this vast and broken world of war, that was all anyone ever needed. Just someone to be there. A week passed. Arya's health gradually improved, though pain still stabbed through what remained of her legs each time she moved. And with every reminder of that pain came the memory of all she had sacrificed. She hadn't only lost her legs, she had lost her freedom, the most sacred thing to any warrior. Shane noticed, and no matter how badly he wanted to help, there was nothing he could do to replace what she had lost. Her legs would never return, and that loss, deep, aching, unyielding, was something she couldn't abandon. One morning, as the light of Kepler 442b spilled into the cave, Arya stared at her legs, the emptiness in her eyes like a wound that refused to heal. "I can't live like this," she said, her voice hoarse not from pain, but from frustration. "I can't keep living a life dependent on someone else." Shane stood and walked toward her. He didn't respond right away. He simply stood there, looking at her as if trying to find something in her gaze. He knew her pride was not something easily shaken, but he also knew if they couldn't support each other, this life would become an endless war. "You don't have to do this alone," Shane said firmly, yet patiently. "We can find a way so you don't have to feel like this." Arya looked up at him, her eyes clouded with stormy doubt. Yet there was a softness there, something vulnerable she couldn't quite hide. "What can you do for me?" she asked, her voice uncertain. "If you want me to survive, how can you possibly understand what this feels like?" Shane didn't answer right away. He lowered his head, searching for the right words. But then he looked back up, directly into her eyes. "You're not a warrior alone anymore," he said. His voice held a weight, as though he were making a vow he would never walk away from. "I'm not leaving you behind." The sorrow in Arya began to melt, but in its place came fear. Fear of what lay ahead. Fear of what they were becoming. While Shane busied himself repairing his ship, Arya was left with only silence in her thoughts. Yet one thing became certain. No matter the pain, no matter how steep the road, she would not let herself fall. Shane had made a decision. He would find his ship again. The battlefield was still littered with the wreckage of vessels from both sides, but he knew survival hinged on one thing: recovering a 3D scanning device that could help Arya heal, or at the very least, give her hope. When he stepped out of the cave, the cold air of Kepler 442b bit at their skin. Arya shivered, but even the frigid wind couldn't strip away the faint, fragile hope blooming in her chest. That maybe, just maybe, her legs might carry her across the ground once more. "We're going to make it, right?" she asked Shane, though deep down, she knew it was a question that had no perfect answer. Shane simply nodded, but in his eyes burned something more powerful than words: resolve. "We're not giving up," he said. A life reborn. Shane stood silently in the shadow of the cave's entrance, the soft blue glow from the phosphorescent crystals above painting his face with a faint, otherworldly light. Arya was asleep. It wasn't a peaceful sleep, but it was one of the rare moments he could slip away. Each morning, before the dim light of Kepler 442b's sun crept into the cave, he would quietly place a small pouch beside her. Inside, purified water, synthesized rations, and a few wild fruits he had painstakingly gathered the day before. These small acts were his way of saying, "I'll come back." He never wanted her to feel abandoned. Not once. Though he never explained himself, Arya began to sense that Shane's daily disappearances didn't carry the scent of betrayal. He wasn't like the others, the commanders, the comrades, even her own kind who had once left her behind. Shane was different. He carried a strange warmth, a presence she never dared to believe in for too long. Back at the wreckage of his ship, a trek that took hours across the desolate terrain, Shane stepped into a silent battlefield. Once glorious technology now lay buried beneath cold sands. Inside, the ship's core had gone dark. Its central AI was disconnected. He had to recharge the system, reinstall the data cores, then wait for hours as each function slowly flickered back to life. When the first screen lit up and the boot message appeared, Shane smiled, as if a forgotten part of himself had been revived. Reboot successful. Active protocol. Reconstruct biological model. "No," Shane typed into the console. "Not for killing. This time, to save someone." He connected a 3D scanner, reconstructing the musculoskeletal structure of Arya's legs using the bioscans he had discreetly collected while she slept. The system didn't quite understand. Most of its schematics were designed to generate prosthetics for combat robots, not living beings. And so, Shane began to learn everything from scratch: fabrication, weight distribution, neural interface using electromagnetic synaptic mimics. Technology, once built for war, was now being repurposed to heal. Materials weren't easy to come by. Shane risked scavenging other wrecks, crossing fields of biomines and pockets of toxic gas leaks. At times, he thought he wouldn't make it back. But whenever he pictured Arya, that fierce gaze masking a well of fear and pain, he kept moving. After 2 failed prototypes, both too heavy and clumsy, Shane refined his design using carbon joints from an old transport module, reduced friction with a thin alloy of Xelari, and calibrated the shock absorption to match Arya's natural gait. When he finally completed the prosthetics, he sat holding them in his hands for nearly an hour, unable to believe they were real. Under the twin moons, one reflecting his world, the other hers, Shane knew it was time to go back. That night, Arya sat at the cave's mouth, her eyes fixed on the sky, where Xelari shimmered faintly like a smudge in space. In her chest was longing, a desire to return, and fear. Would she still be herself? Footsteps echoed behind her on the hardened ground. Shane approached, something carefully wrapped in insulated fabric in his hands. His eyes betrayed his nervousness. As Arya turned, she saw a pair of legs. Not of flesh and blood, but something else. Strange, miraculous. "These are for you," Shane said softly, as if offering a piece of his own soul. Arya stared at them. For the first time in her life, her heart trembled. On her world, bodily replacement was taboo. Their forms were sacred, divine gifts never to be altered. Yet reality told a harsher tale. Thousands of warriors returned with missing limbs, eyes, broken, forgotten. She swallowed hard. Her throat clenched. I used to think losing a part of myself meant the end," she whispered, voice trembling. "But I don't want to die. I don't want to be left behind. I don't want to become a ghost of who I was." A single tear slid down Arya's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Shane knelt, slowly unwrapping the prosthetics and fitting them onto her legs. He did so with reverence, as though handling a sacred relic. When he finished, he looked up, eyes tender. "You can do this. Arya, stand." A moment of silence. Arya bit her lip, and then she tried. For the first time in days, she braced herself against a rock and lifted her body. The sensation was strange, not painful, but full of possibility. She stood, on new legs. Shane stood before her, eyes alight with joy he could no longer hide. "You're still a warrior, and more than that." Arya laughed, not the mocking laugh she gave when they first met, but a real one. Pure, free, like a child rediscovering her body. She took one step, then another. Her legs trembled, but she walked. "Amazing," Shane whispered. Arya looked at him, eyes still wet but shining with new light. "Shane, thank you. Not just for the legs, for not leaving me behind." They stood together under the sparkling veil of the galaxy, their 2 worlds glowing at opposite ends of the horizon. In that moment, there was no human, no Xelari, no war, no hatred, only a man and a warrior, walking forward side by side. A life had been reborn, not by gods, but by the trust between 2 former enemies. A dance under the stars. The ground beneath Arya's feet still felt unfamiliar. Each step she took seemed like an attempt to reforge a part of her lost identity. Shane stood before her, his hands still resting lightly on her waist to keep them balanced. "Welcome back to the world," he whispered, not like a congratulation, but as a greeting from the heart, meant for a warrior reborn. Arya looked up at him. For a brief moment, they were no longer enemies, no longer an alien or a captain, but simply two people, one who had once fallen and one who always believed in the ability to rise again. The sky of Kepler, 442b that night, draped them in a shimmering veil of light. Two planets, Earth, the distant blue orb, and the faint red hue of Xelari, appeared at opposite ends of the horizon, like two lovers separated by fate, now whispering to each other through the dark. Shane took a half step back and extended his hand. Do you want to try walking a bit more? This time like a dance? Arya eyed him suspiciously, her brow furrowing. She had never danced, at least not in the way humans understood it. But Shane's gaze held no force, only a gentle invitation. She placed her hand in his, and they began to move, not to any specific rhythm, but simply to the pulse of each other's breath. Their first steps were clumsy, but it was this clumsiness that made them both laugh. Arya rested her head on Shane's shoulder for a moment, finding her balance, and in that moment, she touched his heart. A faint blue light flickered where they made contact, a sign of the integrated biological technology within Shane, something Arya hadn't noticed before. And in that fleeting instant, a rush of memories flashed through her mind like a bolt of lightning. She saw Shane kneeling next to a woman who was dying, perhaps his wife or a sister, her eyes full of tears, her hands stained with blood. Collapsing buildings behind them, children running frantically through smoke and the wailing sound of sirens. Another image, Shane in a spacesuit, holding a weapon, shouting at a screen showing the face of some leader. He was refusing an order. Another image, he was exiled to Kepler, 442b on a mission that felt more like a death sentence. Arya stepped back, her eyes wide. You've lost so many people. Shane froze. What did you see? Not everything, but enough to understand that you're not a soldier just because of an order. She touched her chest gently. You fight for the things I once believed in. A silence settled between them. Not an uncomfortable one, but a strange peace, as if they were both touching the very core of each other's soul. A place where there was no war, no hatred, only memories and the longing to live. Shane sat down on a rock, his gaze turned toward the two planets floating in the distance. Arya walked over to him, for the first time not needing help, but simply wanting to be beside him. On Xelari, Arya said softly, we believe that each star is a soul that once lived. I used to think that was foolish until I could no longer see my father among the millions of stars. Shane said nothing, his eyes still fixed on the sky. And I used to believe that humans could change fate until I realized sometimes fate is what helps you find the one you're meant to find. Arya tilted her head, looking at him. So am I your fate? Shane turned to her, a faint smile curling at the corners of his lips. I'm not sure, but I know, tonight, I'm not alone anymore. Amidst the sea of silver grass, the sound of wind whispering through the canyon, and the light from distant planets above, they sat there, two warriors from two worlds, quietly leaning into each other, as if the entire universe had momentarily stopped spinning to listen to the story of a love that had just begun in solitude. The turning of fate. The soft click echoed lightly, like a breath, signaling the completion of the central control system restoration. Shane sat motionless in front of the dim green interface, his chest rising and falling in the flickering light of the command bay. He had no idea that, in that very moment, as the ship signaled its restart, a chain of Earth satellite systems had immediately detected the unusual life signs on Kepler, 442b, and triggered a search protocol. Millions of kilometers away, in the darkness of deep space, the forward station of Fleet 17 began redirecting a reconnaissance vessel to the new coordinates. Back at their temporary shelter, Shane hid his concern behind his usual smile, but Arya saw through the gray clouds in his eyes. What did you find? She asked, her voice low yet steady. The ships transmitted a signal, Shane replied, placing a hand on the weapon at his side. And someone might have arrived. Without hesitation, Arya responded, I'm coming with you. No, it could be very dangerous. That's exactly why I can't let you go alone. He sighed. She wasn't a fragile woman who needed protecting. She was a warrior. And in the fiery look in her eyes, Shane knew he couldn't stop her. They moved under the night sky, avoiding the rocks that reflected the starlight. Arya crouched on a high ledge, her eyes, like those of a wildcat, observing every movement. Shane stepped softly toward the ship. No traces, no sounds. But then, a tiny blinking light from the cockpit made his heart sink. The system was still active. That meant someone had been here. His hand tightened around his weapon as he silently approached. Suddenly, a figure appeared right behind the slightly ajar door. Shane jumped, raising his gun, then froze. James! The familiar pale blue eyes. The lean yet rugged face of the man who had once been his closest friend in the Special Forces. And behind him, another figure was checking the control panel. Kian, the technician known for cracking jokes, even when injured. Shane, James called softly. Shane lowered his weapon. In that moment, all his worry dissolved into a long exhale of relief. My God, Kian looked up. I thought you were dead. Close, Shane smiled. And you too. How did you know I was here? James held up a handheld device. Signal from the ship. The main station detected it and sent us out. So, I get to go home. Maybe, but we have to leave immediately, Shane. Recon found a disturbance in the airflow above. Could be a strike from the Xelari. We can't waste any more time. Shane hesitated. He looked over at Arya, still watching from distance, her eyes lighting up when she saw him safe. I'm taking someone with me. James frowned. Who? Shane paused for a second. She's Xelari. The air suddenly grew heavy as iron. James took a step back, as though he had misheard. What? Xelari? Shane, you know what we're ordered to do with them. Kian raised an eyebrow, then chuckled lightly. Orders are orders, but I'm not sure if hugging the enemy is part of it. She's not the enemy, Shane said, his gaze sterner than ever. She saved my life, and I saved hers. We survived together. James was still angry. And if Command finds out, you think you can bring her back without facing a court-martial? Shane stared directly into his old friend's eyes, his voice firm. I don't care what they think. She's not. She's Arya. And if you can't understand that, then I don't need to come back. A voice came from behind them, warm and steady. I don't need anyone protecting me, but I know where's the safer place for both of us. Arya stepped out from her hiding spot. She wasn't armed, only her honest gaze and her glittering prosthetic legs shining in the moonlight. Seeing her, James instinctively took a step back, while Kian murmured, So, that's why you didn't want to leave this damned planet. Shane stepped forward to stand beside Arya. In a voice as light as the breeze, he said, We've overcome our differences to survive together. Now, it's your turn. Silence stretched for a few seconds. Then Kian shrugged. I've always liked alien romance stories. I'll pretend I didn't see anything. But James, you should say something. James looked at both of them for a long moment, his eyes tense before they softened. I don't trust her, but I trust you, Shane. If you say she's the one you want to bring, I won't stop you. But remember, when we get back to Earth, things won't be simple. Shane nodded. I understand, but I'd rather face the whole world than lose the one who understands me the most. Arya looked at him, her lips barely curving in a smile, like a flower about to bloom in the frost. The ship's door slowly closed behind them. For people, two humans, one Xelari, and an uncertain, fateful force began their journey home. None of them knew that, at that very moment, the sky above had turned red. The line between life and death. The hum of the jet engines was as quiet as a breeze, but inside the Odyssey's main cabin, The air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Arya sat in a corner of the room, her silver-gray eyes unwavering, staring into the void between the strands of blue nebula drifting silently outside the viewport. Shane stood by the control panel, his hands clenched tightly. In front of him, Colonel Morris, the squadron commander, appeared on the comm screen. His face was as cold as ice, every wrinkle carved like steel. "She's Xelari, a warrior of a race that's killed thousands of our own. You're suggesting bringing her back as an honored guest. I'm suggesting she be treated as a protected prisoner under Article 7 of the Celestial Treaty. No harm, right to speak. That treaty doesn't cover non-human entities. Then it's time we changed our perspective." A long pause. Morris's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "I'll demand she surrender all intelligence on the Xelari military. If she refuses, she'll be prosecuted under war law. No exceptions." The screen went dark. Shane turned away, finding Arya still silent. He opened his mouth to say something, but she stood, her eyes piercing through his defenses like they weren't even there. "So, even after surviving, I'm still just a war trophy?" she asked. "No," he struggled to keep his voice steady. "I'm trying to keep you safe." "Safe? In a glass cage? On an operating table? You really think they'll treat me like a human being?" She didn't wait for an answer. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving Shane with the feeling that he'd just been ripped out of a dream and tossed into the abyss of reality. That night, during the quietest part of the galactic journey, Shane couldn't sleep. He wandered the ship's corridors until the faint light of the observation deck fell on the figure standing there. Arya? She stood alone, facing the vastness of space, where thousands of dead stars were scattered like unspoken pains. Her hand rested lightly on the purple glowing dart, bioweaponry only Xelari warriors carried. No one carried it for defense, only for the end. "Don't do this." Shane's voice cracked as he approached her. Arya didn't turn around. "I died once when I lost my unit. The second time was when I was imprisoned by my own belief in humanity." Shane's hand fell on her shoulder. She turned, and for the first time, he saw something even war couldn't destroy: true fear. "You can't understand what I'm about to lose," she screamed, tears suddenly streaming down her face as if she could no longer hold back her armor. "You won't lose anything if you let me fight for you. I betrayed my country when I loved someone they called the enemy. Arya, don't make me betray my heart again." She looked at him, a gaze that lasted for centuries. Her eyes were full of desolation, but in them, there was a tiny, fragile glimmer like a hair in the wind, but it was hope. "Do you think you can convince them to spare me?" "No, but I can make the whole world see the real you. You're not a species. You're Arya, the one I..." Shane stopped, but she already knew the rest of his words. Arya nodded, slowly lowering the weapon to the floor. The soft clink echoed like a clock stopping. The next morning, Colonel Morris boarded the ship through the docking port. He didn't come alone. With him were 2 black armor guards, assault rifles ready. "We'll take her to the Alpha 3 interrogation camp. Along the way, she'll be monitored every step. No contact, no conversation. And if she refuses to cooperate, I can't promise anything." Arya stood in the hallway, empty-handed, her head held high. Shane stood beside her like an immovable pillar. James and Kian were there too, their eyes wavering. "She comes with me," Shane said. "I'll take responsibility." "You don't have the authority to request that." "Then I resign. No soldier, no officer, just a man bringing a survivor home." Morris glared, but then nodded. "Fine, you've chosen your side." Shane squeezed Arya's hand. She looked at him, and for the first time in her life, her gaze wasn't that of a warrior, but of a lover, someone who believed a different ending could exist if only someone stood up for it. Outside the ship's deck, Earth appeared like an eternal turquoise gem in the dark of space. But Shane knew, inside that gem, there was a storm waiting to tear apart everything they had just built. And ahead was where love would be judged by the court of all humankind. Forbidden memories. The Odyssey drifted silently in orbit at the edge of Earth's atmosphere. Inside, the space maintained its usual quiet, like a waiting room where the truth was yet to be revealed. Shane sat in the med bay, staring through the fog glass at Arya resting, her skin glowing with a soft blue light, sparkling like living crystals. He knew, if they hesitated any longer, time would no longer be on their side. "I want to connect my mind with hers," Shane said to the ship's medical AI. Warning: cross-species neural connections have not been proven safe. May cause emotional shock, brain damage, or temporary cognitive disturbances. "I don't care. I need to understand her. I need her to understand me." The system remained silent for a few seconds. Then the lights turned green. The machine began adjusting the synchronization frequency. Arya had appeared behind him without him noticing. She looked at him, her eyes deep as though an entire galaxy awaited decoding. "Are you sure? If you see what I've seen, you may never look at me the same again." Shane walked over, gently placing his hand on the center of her chest, where Xelari's heart glowed when moved. "That's exactly why. I need to see." They sat across from each other. Two biological connectors were inserted into the napes of their necks, crossing through a neutral emotional modulation core. A silver stream, like a river of souls, began to flow. At first, it was slow, fragments of memories flickering like dreams. A Xelari child running through a green stone corridor, laughter echoing from afar. Shane holding the body of his mother, lost in a space accident, his young hands trembling. Then everything sped up. Arya saw Shane, his first battlefield, his face smeared with blood, eyes hollow as he stared at the bodies of fallen comrades. She saw the nights he couldn't sleep, writing letters he never sent. She felt the fear and the remorse over every life lost under his command. At the same time, Shane was submerged in Arya's world, where war wasn't a choice but a legacy. She had witnessed her father, General Kthar Valerin, the leader known to the Xelari as the Last Anchor Beak, shedding tears as he sent unit after unit into the fire, not knowing who would return. Shane saw Arya kneeling beside her younger brother's body, shot by humans, her eyes dry, only streaks of blood forming cold lines like molten steel. And then the forbidden memory. Arya screamed. The silver light turned a brilliant purple, like a crack that could never heal. Shane saw the image of Arya during her succession ritual when she was only 13. A brutal ceremony where she was forced to sever ties with her personal emotions. But she had failed. Her heart raced. She cried. And for that, her father had hidden her away, forbidding her true identity from being known, not allowing anyone to see that the heir with the most human heart was the warrior's daughter. Shane jerked back, disconnecting from the link. Sweat drenched his back. Arya gasped, her eyes bloodshot. "You saw," she whispered, her voice nearly breaking. "Yes, you are the princess in the shadows of a dying empire. If this leaks, the Xelari will revolt. Civil war, and humans will take the opportunity to wipe them all out. No one will survive." Shane stood up. His eyes were bright, but not out of fear. "Then we'll keep that secret. But you need to know this. You're not alone anymore. You don't understand. I've been programmed not to love. It's a taboo for an heir. Then break it, just like you broke every rule on that forsaken planet. For me. For yourself." Arya choked up. Her hand trembled, but then, for the first time, she placed a touch on his cheek, one that carried no strategy, no calculation. It was simply human. "If you're crazy, then I'll be crazy too." In the distance, a signal came through. Earth calling Odyssey. The trial will take place in 48 hours. Prisoners Arya Xelari and Captain Shane Gray are summoned to appear before the Interstellar Council. Any interference will be considered treason. They looked at each other. No one spoke. Because they both knew, ahead of them, the place where their souls had connected would face off against political power, and there would be no turning back. The warrior's choice. The alarm system aboard the Odyssey blared, its rhythmic thrum echoing like the beating of war drums. Prepare to enter Earth's orbit. Time to approach, 2 hours, 17 minutes. The spacecraft shook gently as it entered the stable gravitational zone. Inside, the atmosphere felt dense, not just from the pressure of the atmosphere, but because every glance, every breath carried the weight of life and death decisions. Colonel Morris stood before the control panel, his voice dry, like the wind howling through a metallic corridor. Arya Xelari, the prisoner, will be handed over to the High Command as soon as we land. No one is to have contact with her except for high-security personnel. Arya, her hands bound by magnetic cuffs, sat quietly in the holding cell. Her eyes were unreadable, but Shane knew beneath the cold exterior was a storm of conflict. He stepped forward, his eyes burning with the smoldering fire that had been building for days. If you harm her, his voice was low, fierce. I'll leave the military. I'll expose this. I'd rather be branded a traitor than let the peace die in your iron cage. The room fell silent, save for the mechanical hum. James and Kian exchanged a glance, the weight of the moment hanging between them. After a brief pause, James tilted his head slightly. Remember Titan 4? You saved my life from a Leviathan. I owe you one. Kian smirked, his voice warm but serious. I owe you a bottle of whiskey. But if I have to repay that with a little rebellion, it'll be worth it. In the auxiliary control room, James typed quickly on the virtual interface. I'll disable the navigation system in 120 seconds. Kian, get the escape pod ready. Already done. The ID system has been overridden. Arya will be listed as radiation-infected biological prisoner. No one will check. And Shane. He's the emergency medical escort under direct orders from Health Command. A perfect cover. The escape pod 003 powered up. Arya's cuffs were removed, and she stood facing Shane in the small compartment, just big enough for the two of them. Outside, warning lights blinked in a final warning from the universe. There was no turning back. Arya turned to him, her silver gray eyes gleaming with intensity. Are you sure about this? Leaving Earth, betraying your own kind, for a Xelari? Shane smiled, no hesitation in his voice. Not for a Xelari, for the woman I love. Love? Arya laughed, a hint of something like tears in her voice. Is it really that easy for your kind of love? No, he replied, his gaze steady. But when you do, you'll sacrifice everything. The escape pod detached from the Odyssey. It shot away like a droplet flung from an ocean, heading toward an unnamed neutral planet at the edge of the trade route between three great civilizations: Earth, Xelari, and the Andronis Alliance. Inside the pod, Shane held Arya's hand. They sat in silence, eyes locked, no words needed. Their hearts, after all they had lost, were now beginning a new chapter of trust and hope. Behind them, aboard the mothership Odyssey, Colonel Morris slammed his hand on the control panel. Find them. Immediately. Shane Gray is now a deserter. And if he's truly allied with the Xelari princess, we might just be witnessing the birth of a revolution. James and Kian stood side by side, silent. They knew their actions could be seen as treason. But deep down, they understood better than anyone else. War would never end without those willing to break the rules. A new world, the forbidden realm of hope. The escape pod crash-landed into a valley, its surroundings bathed in the glow of cobalt blue forests, where half-mineral, half-organic creatures pulsed with the rhythm of the planet's heartbeat. Glowing moss sparkled like stars dancing beneath a violet sky that hung over two moons. Everything here carried an otherworldly beauty, dreamlike and ethereal, as if they had stepped into a dream that never existed. The air was light, the breath easy, so much so that both Shane and Arya felt as though they had wandered into a realm not belonging to humans or the Xelari. Shane looked around, his hands still trembling from the imperfect landing. He turned to look at Arya, his eyes lighting up, but still unable to hide the confusion beneath. "Where are we?" Shane asked, his voice raspy, as though he were lost in the enchantment of this place. Arya gently closed her eyes, letting herself feel the unique energy that hung in the air. Every cell in her body seemed to vibrate in response to this strange environment. She whispered, her voice tinged with a hint of nostalgia. "This used to be a neutral ground, a forbidden place, sacred, more precisely. According to Xelari legend, it's where the last leaders of the three ancient tribes signed the pact to end the cycle of destruction. And then they disappeared, the Coalsack Nebula planet." "Disappeared?" Shane asked, his surprise evident as he moved closer to her. "All three tribes disappeared?" "Maybe they chose a life without history, just the present." Arya smiled softly, her eyes holding a touch of mystery. Shane said nothing, standing silently as he gazed at the vast space around them. It felt as though they had found the final peaceful sanctuary in this universe. Days passed, and they began to rebuild their lives, not from old foundations, but from what they could create. Using materials from the escape pod and the strange plant creatures around them, they built a small house, a fusion of technology and nature. Arya, with her skill in crafting from organic materials, designed an air filtration system using tree resin. She knew how to harness the local auroral energy to power the escape pod station. Shane took charge of adjusting and optimizing the solar power systems, ensuring a steady energy supply for everything they created. They worked together, day by day, growing closer, as if the things that once separated them no longer mattered. Both of them understood that love wasn't just some abstract concept. It was a matter of survival. They needed each other, not just to survive, but to keep hold of their humanity, or their Xelari nature, before war wore everything away. Shane began keeping a daily journal, a habit he'd maintained since Earth. Day 12 since the escape. Arya's trying to bake with a planet-specific corn-like fruit. Seems to explode if left too long. She won't let me near it anymore, because last time, I blew up the stove. Shane wrote, his laughter still echoing through the words. Arya chuckled as she read the journal entry he'd left open. She smiled, a touch of mischief in her eyes, before adding her own note. Day 13. Shane still doesn't realize I made that corn explode on purpose, just to hear him yell my name through the smoke. First time I've ever heard him say it so worried. I know I've fallen in love. Arya wrote, her eyes lighting up as she recalled the moment. It was these simple moments, a morning filled with laughter or a minor kitchen accident, that made their hearts race. Love, in a world so unpredictable, wasn't easy. But it was these little things that made them realize love wasn't just an emotion. It was a method of survival. Only through love could they hold on to hope. One night, as the faint blue flames from their campfire flared up, Shane sat across from Arya, watching the light dance in her eyes. "We should send a signal," Shane suddenly said, breaking the silence. "To be hunted?" Arya raised an eyebrow, her eyes reflecting the firelight, her expression serious. "No, to tell the universe that we still exist, and that our choice isn't to run, but to resist in another way, with peace," Shane declared, his voice deep and resolute. Arya looked at him, her gaze steady. She could feel the strength in his decision, but there was also a hint of concern. There had been a time when she thought she was too tired of war, of hatred, but now, with Shane, she felt like she could see a different kind of light in this dark universe. But if someone responds, then what? Arya asked, her eyes never leaving his. Shane took her hand, squeezing it gently. Then we talk. He answered, without hesitation. And if they come to destroy us? Arya pressed, her lips tight. Then at least they'll have heard the last voice of conscience. Shane said, his gaze unwavering. And on the 30th night, the final signal was sent, a message encoded in both ancient and modern languages, broadcast out to the universe. We were once enemies. We were once the embodiment of war. But we have loved. And because of that, we are no longer enemies. If you too are tired of blood and cold orders, listen. Peace does not need delegations. Only the courage not to continue killing. 3 days passed, and space remained silent, still as a barren field without a trace of life. But then, on the third night, a strange signal appeared on Shane's control panel. The screen flickered, then displayed a strange string of code. Arya froze, unable to believe her eyes. It was the code of Andronis, a long-lost civilization they had heard of but never encountered. Rumors said Andronis was a neutral civilization, but they were intensely mysterious. They had never interfered in the conflicts between Earth and the Xelari. The signal was simple, yet powerful. We have listened. Shane and Arya looked at each other, silent. They both knew this was the true beginning of the journey they had started. The feeling between them, as they saw that signal, wasn't just excitement. It was hope. A hope that peace could truly happen, that this life wasn't just an endless war. This was only the beginning of a revolution they had courageously chosen, knowing full well the road ahead would be full of challenges. The hybrid child between two worlds. Years had passed since Shane and Arya made the decision to step into a new life, leaving everything behind in search of their own paradise. The vastness of space remained still, but beneath the shimmering auroras of the Coalsack Nebula, life had blossomed among the radiant luminescent trees, and the love they shared for each other had grown strong, like roots stretching deep into the earth. In their hand-built home, nestled deep within the strange forests, two individuals who had once been opposites in every way had learned to love not just because they needed each other to survive, but because they had found in one another a true reason to live. They were no longer warriors, no longer enemies. They had become companions on a journey not just for survival, but for a life full of meaning, brimming with hope. Their love was not an easy one, but the harmony they found in each other, the understanding forged through years of survival, had taught them that peace was not something that could be written in a treaty. It started with trust, with each individual daring to open their hearts and love. Then, in the stillness of those years, an unexpected event occurred. A survey ship on a mission from the Planetary Union had detected a faint signal from this distant planet. The scientists aboard never imagined that, after all these years, survivors from the war between humanity and the Xelari would still be here, and more remarkably, that there was a creature who embodied the merging of two worlds. The ship landed on the planet, where the luminescent trees still shimmered beneath the twin moon's violet glow. From a distance, a child appeared, but this was no ordinary child. Its eyes were a mix of silver and transparent light, a blend of human and Xelari blood. It stood there, its gaze calm, as if it had known this encounter was destined. The surveyors looked at each other, astonished and bewildered. They had never seen anything like this before. The child approached them, gently holding in its hands a holographic journal, the only remaining artifact from Shane, containing all his memories and messages. When the child opened the journal, a faint light emanated from it, and from the last words Shane had written, a voice softly but clearly echoed. Peace is never just about agreements. It begins when we choose to understand each other, one life at a time. The words reverberated through the silence of space, lingering in the hearts of the strangers standing before the child. The surveyors could feel the sacredness, the power in every word Shane had written, even after so many years. During their years on Kepler, 442b, Shane and Arya had created a peaceful space amidst nature, where there was no war, no enmity, and no wounds that could never heal. Every day they lived was a simple yet meaningful existence. Sometimes, Arya would sit by the soft blue fire, telling Shane ancient stories of the Xelari, of battles fought, betrayals, and sacrifices. Shane, while tending to the outside tasks, would gather rare materials, and together with Arya, they would repurpose the survival pod's equipment into something useful for their new life. Their love had become not just about sharing peaceful days, but also about a profound understanding of each other, of the wounds in the past and the hopes for the future. And they had chosen to live not out of fear of death, but because in each other's love, they had found a reason to fight, a reason to live. Arya looked at Shane, feeling the happiness of waking up each morning beside the man she loved. Shane, though a war captain, when with Arya, was just a man who loved and wanted to protect the woman he had chosen to be with on the path they had chosen together. One evening, beneath the glow of the two purple moons, they sat together by the fire. Shane looked at Arya, holding her hand tightly, and said, "We haven't just created a place to live. We're creating a future, for ourselves and for the generations to come." Arya smiled, her eyes shining with confidence. "Then, our child will be the first sign, won't they?" Shane nodded, looking up at the starry sky, a sign of a new world, a world where we are no longer enemies. And as the hybrid child between two worlds held Shane's journal, it understood. It was not just a product of love between two civilizations. It was hope. Hope for the future. Hope for a peace that could exist not through war, but through understanding and love. When the survey ship departed, taking the child and its story with it, a message was sent from the distant planet. Peace does not come from forgiveness, but from a change in the way each individual perceives and understands one another. And as the child grew, the story of its parents would continue to be told, not because it was a legend, but because it was a reality lived day by day, generation after generation, and it would never be forgotten. Thank you for watching Sci-Fi Alien Stories. If you love sci-fi tales about aliens and cosmic mysteries, make sure to hit like to support the channel and subscribe so you don't miss the next thrilling story. What do you think about today's story? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you're the first to uncover new mysteries. See you in the next video.